Okay, good afternoon. I want to call the meeting to order. Today is November 30th, I think. Is that right? Okay. I want to welcome everybody here. And we are, actually we could take first, we have a need to add a item to the agenda. And to properly do that, I first have to know that 2/3 of the members are here. Gordon, do you want to explain? We have a situation where we received a check and about to receive others. We haven't given the authority to accept them.
Our bylaws require that any check or grant for which we apply, or any grant that we receive, over $100,000, that we need board approval for the executive or the CEO to deal with this. And so that we can actually spend the money before we would like to have, we have 3 resolutions, all of which follow the same form and function, and hopefully will not cause heartburn.
Right now, what we need is a motion, because we don't have another meeting until January. So we need a motion to be able to, this isn't a vote on the item, this is a vote just to put it on the agenda. If you'd like to discuss it, but this would be to enable Gordon to accept monies in excess
Of $100,000.
$1,000.
So move.
Not to spend monies in it, it's to accept monies.
The RTFH.
The RTF, yes. Well, on behalf of the RTFH. Okay, did I hear a motion? And someone?
I second that.
Okay, I had a couple seconds, I had Nate first. Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed to this, to putting it on the agenda? Hearing none, I'll deem that to be unanimously approved. At the appropriate time, we'll deal with that. Okay, I have 3 speakers who have requested time to speak under public comment. These are non-agenda items, and we will be keeping time as soon as we're up and running. Okay, each speaker will have a maximum of 3 minutes, please. And the first of those will be John Townsend, followed by Daniel Beeman, followed by Mary Lou Finley.
I'm John Townsend, Matthew 253440 Ministries. I've been working with the homeless here in San Diego since 1970, but more intensely for the past 20 years. Our ministry has been working in 12 other cities in the United States where we've been successful in getting over 200 people off the streets without any government assistance into communities and into jobs, stable in their housing, simply through ministry on the street. My comment to you today is that there's a huge deficit here in San Diego. First of all, for working with the spiritual problem that occurs when people become homeless. There's a spiritual trauma that takes place when that happens. It needs to be treated. It's not a mental health issue, but without treatment, it leads to mental health issues and to substance abuse problems. So people who become chronically homeless tend to have those problems. The other issue that I see is we don't have nearly enough housing in this region, and certainly not things that are market affordable to people who are working, because we run into a huge number of people in our ministries here who have an income, but they can't afford to maintain housing because their wages are going up at a slower rate than their rents are going up. That's my main comment.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Next speaker, Daniel.
Hello, my name is Daniel Beeman. I reside at 3897 Caminito Aguilar.
and luckily I have Section 8 housing. But I want to speak to you today about the weather and about we don't have any shelters up. And the other shelters are full. And there are thousands of people out there that I see daily that are homeless. I put together something called the San Diego Homeless Coalition, or the Homeless Coalition San Diego. And I'm trying to gather everybody together so we can talk, including the homeless. Because many times it seems like they're left out, but they're the ones we're supposed to be working for. And they don't have much of a voice. When we try to feed them an alcohol and they say that they're going to give us tickets, we just want to help people. That's all a lot of us want to do. So we need to do something. The first thing we need to do is figure out what's happening with these contracts of the affordable housing going off, because that's going to give us even more homeless. And there's a lot of contracts coming up with the Housing Commission that are going to take affordable units off, like the ones in Penasquitos that just recently went off, and they're going to redevelop. We need to look at that, stop that, nip that in the bud. The second thing that we need to do is we need to go out and gather and make sure, like you're looking to do here, to have some type of outreach. Because I tried to go through the website, it's really hard to get through, and I'm fairly intelligent. But it's difficult. We need to be able to gather everybody together so that we can all help. I'm finding it's, like he was saying, there's a lot of spiritual battles out there, but there's a lot of, for some reason, doubt of help by the churches. I mean, churches have parking lots, and people could stay there in their cars in their parking lots, but they're not doing that. And I don't know why. But we need to figure out why isn't the private sector, why aren't the churches coming and helping out a little bit more? Why aren't we having all these parking lots that we have empty at night full? Now, I went to USD the other night to watch the voice of our San Diego choir sing. And on the ticket, when I paid $1.75 for the ticket in the parking structure, it said I could park all night there. So I had a ticket and a legal statement that I could park there all night. But I'm sure if I was homeless and I was sleeping in that car, I'd be booted out of there before you knew it, even though I had a legal document saying that I paid and I was there. Let's see if we can get some of these parking lots to help us out. What if I pay $5 to some of these parking lots and I stay there overnight and I'm clean and I'm good? We can do change. We need to do change. It's very sad what's out there. I'm blessed. I'm so blessed because I have Section 8 housing. But they try to kick me out all the time too. I got a 3-day notice last week because of something from the management side.
Daniel, thank you.
Thank you.
Mary Lou Finley. This will be the last of our public comment speakers.
Yeah, my name is Mary Lou Finley, and I actually live in La Mesa. But I've been living in San Diego County for over 20 years. And I have been a community grassroots organizer for those 20 years. We've been dealing with homeless problem for all those years and more. First of all, it's time for San Diego to stop treating the homeless like they're criminals. Being homeless is not a crime. It's an effect of a society in which, especially San Diego, we have almost no affordable housing. And like Rancho Penasquitos he was talking about, they've got over 300 units. They're going to destroy them, redevelop, and cut down to maybe 60. 300 to 60? What are all the other people going to do? And I saw a documentary called Tony about homelessness, and he went to Houston. And Houston and other places like Utah, apparently, have come up with the fact that housing first, and then you won't worry about the other services these people need. And it's, you can't, I don't know, we've got to stop categorizing prejudice against these people that they're lazy or a lot of them are people who have a job and can't afford housing, especially here in San Diego County. If you've lived here for any time at all, you know how incredibly expensive it is to live in. There's really no excuse. California is either the 6th or the 8th largest economy in the world, not in the country, in the world. And there's no excuse that we can't come up with a workable, sustainable program for housing these people permanently.
Thank you. That concludes the public comment, and I'd like to next go to the consent calendar. And we did have listed 3 items: approval of the board meeting minutes, October. That's what we did. The financial report of September of this year, and the approval of formation of the ad hoc committee to the Evaluation Advisory Committee for the purposes of developing domestic violence standards. I think it'd be appropriate, if there's no objection, to add a 4th, and that would be the item that we voted to be able to take action on the emergency item today. But if anyone wants to discuss that, we can hold that. So that would be my recommendation, is that oh, that's a different, excuse me, there is 4. There is 4. I was misconstruing one of the items. The item that I missed was the approval of the check signing board resolution. Okay, so that along with the emergency item that we have added, so there's a potential for 5 items, and if nobody objects, I think a motion would be in order for consent calendar approval, or to approve.
May I comment that there's actually 3 separate resolutions, as a separate resolution is required for each request for $100,000, and we have 3 of them because there's 3 different entities. So there will be 4 that are on the consent agenda now, plus 3 emergency ones. All dealing with raising money.
Okay. Receiving money. Okay. Go ahead.
Just one question for the record. The authority to receive a $100,000 check, just curious the source of the contribution?
There's 3 applications that we've made. One is with Funders Together, and they have actually granted $425,000 over 2 years, but $250,000, the check is in the mail. 2 other applications, one to the city and one to the county for CDBG funds, each for $120,000.
Excellent. Well, thank you to all 3 of those. And are happy to motion or second?
A motion first. Right. I'm sorry, is that a motion?
Yes.
Okay, I have a motion.
Second.
And a second. Okay, are there any questions? A little confusing.
So, Supervisor, the only comment is the county cannot vote on the item that relates to the CDBG funding with HCDS.
Is it CDBG or is it?
Yes, CDBG.
Okay.
Where the funding source.
So, yeah.
Out of an abundance of caution, so I'm going to remove my motion.
Yeah.
We'll have somebody else move the
And a
item.
second.
And the second.
I'll put forward a motion.
Thank you.
Okay, Greg, I have a second. Okay, I have a motion and a second, and I want to note that none of the representatives of the county nor the city will be voting on
Their respective portions.
their respective motions, okay? That's clear? All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that's granted.
Supervisor, before we move on, just a point, if I could make a suggestion. I don't quite understand why we would have to approve each time a check comes in from a funder. and maybe there are good reasons for it, maybe when it was put into the bylaws, there was good reason for it, but I'd ask that someone take a look at that at some point when we're relooking at the bylaws.
We are going to be looking at that. There are several things that have come up that are kind of quirks in the bylaws that need a little bit of fine tuning.
Okay,
So
good, thank you.
at a subsequent meeting, we'll get into that. Okay, with that, we are on now item number 4, Executive Officer and CEO updates. Item number 4. Okay. Let me just make a brief mention. I've mentioned at previous meetings that the county is going to be issuing a NOFA, a Notice of Funding Availability. I'm told by our staff that that should be coming out in the next couple of weeks.
On Tuesday.
On Tuesday, within the next week. And that involves a commitment on the county's part of $25 million that can be used to help assist in the development of projects in various different ways that'll be outlined in the NOFA. But for anyone considering an affordable housing project, they can have access to portions of that money. What we're trying to do is use that to stimulate the development of additional investment. And that's completely separate from what I've also mentioned in the past. The several properties, I think there's 11 initially. One of those is sort of borderline, but there'll be at least 10 county properties that will be also be the rules for which the competition will be issued probably late this year at some point, so that we can start to, at least the first couple of those sites, start to develop affordable housing at those locations. And I tell the first two that we have looked at, one is downtown and one is in Claremont. And I think they're not just good properties, they're excellent properties. And those will be affordable housing units. So with that, I should also mention, I think we'll be dealing with later, we had some good news this week, and that is the numbers from Hepe are declining pretty dramatically. Because of the incubation period, we always have to be careful in what we say, but it is clear that some point in August was the high point in terms of the number of cases, and we're seeing a strong downward trend now over several weeks to the point where it's still of concern, and we're still going to be vaccinating people. We've vaccinated over 105,000 people now. We will continue with those efforts until we know this is down to something of far less significance. So you'll be hearing more about that. With that, Mr. Vice Chair, do you have any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do. Just a couple of brief updates from the city. I heard as one of our public commenters had mentioned the interest in safe parking. Had the opportunity to open and expand some of our safe parking zones in the city of San Diego. We now have 3 locations. The newest one, a city-owned parking lot near the intersection of Arrow Drive and Murphy Canyon Road, with an additional 60 spaces, and of course an expansion of the JFS site as well for an additional 40 spaces there. And we're really excited for our continued partnership with Dreams for Change. The temporary bridge structures, so the first large sprung structure will be opening tomorrow. We expect to move about 300 and up to 350 individuals as that begins to program out. The first tenants will be coming from the transitional camp area at the foot of Golden Hill, single adult men, and that will be operated by Alpha Project. And then subsequently later in December, the 250 beds for veterans off of Sports Arena Boulevard and up to 150 beds operated by St. Vincent de Paul should open up. So we are looking forward to that. Subsequently, the transitional camp area will be closing down when all of those occupants and tenants have been successfully moved out to their respective bridge structures, and we will be reevaluating that program for a report back to both this committee as well as my Select Committee on the Homelessness. In addition to the Hep A public health emergency, the city continues its ongoing sanitation efforts. And then I mentioned the next Select Committee meeting on homelessness is coming up on Monday, December 11th at 9 a.m. Our topics will be street outreach, homeless court, the upcoming Project Homeless Connect, an overview of state legislation under consideration for support, and housing packages as well. Really quick, I want to acknowledge and thank the Lamesa City Council this week who voted to join the Regional Task Force on the Homeless, and certainly would encourage more leadership from other cities across the county to take a similar action and engage with this body so we can really centralize our efforts regionally. Thank you.
Our Secretary, Karen, do you have any comments? Our distinguished treasurer, Vargas, do you have any
I don't
comments?
know about distinguished, but I would, just a couple of things. The council member mentioned the tent that will be on our property, Apologos Village's property, and as you mentioned, towards the end of December is when we hope to have that available, and we'll be focusing on families and single women. What I wanted to mention is, and it's in keeping with one of the commenters, the public commenter, John, I believe was his name, who mentioned the need for affordable housing. So our tent will be up for a year's period of time. At the tail end of next year, that tent will come down, and then we will start construction. We'll break ground on a 14-story building there, which will have over 400 affordable housing units that will accommodate families, seniors, and chronically homeless. So we're excited about that, and Civic San Diego just approved that plan a couple of weeks ago to move forward. So it'll be good, and that NOFA that you've just made available for $25 million, I have my eye on it. So anyway, but just by way of update, because at the end of the day, we have these tents up, and we all know that's a temporary measure. Really, the true source of ending homelessness, if you want to call it ending homelessness, or at least addressing homelessness, is really having the units, and that's what we need, is those units. So just wanted to share that with you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I would disabuse you of looking at all 25 million if you think that that's possible. I don't want to burst your bubble. That's not going to happen. Okay. With that, Mr. Walker.
Thank you. The first item on the action agenda is a request for approval for an outreach proposal. As we have looked, the reason this is on the agenda today is that up to this point, the RTFH has not necessarily been operational in any of its structures. And as we've looked at the needs within the system, we think that there is a need for a different type of outreach. And that outreach is, instead of being centered around the organizations, the service provider organizations, would be more of a generalized, person-centric outreach. And so we have been discussing with potential partners the possibility of us developing an outreach program, and what we would like to do is to do a model which would consist of 2 teams of 2 people each. We'll bring in some outside HUD TA providers that are excellent on this, so that we're using best practices. I don't know that we would normally come to the board for this, but because this represents an increase in, I don't want it to be mission creep, but rather necessary to actually complete our goals and purposes. So, Mr. Chair, I'm hoping that we can get a positive vote on this as we go ahead, so that as we move forward, that we'll have the board's support.
Okay. This is actually item number 5A.
Yes.
Any questions? John?
I think we as a board have to decide if we want this, the regional task force to start doing service provider roles. I understand the idea of coordination, training, but I think when it's on the ground service provider role, I think we as a board have to decide if that's something we want the task force to do.
I'm curious to know, maybe I just misread this. Are we saying, is RTFH saying they want to teach other outreach teams how to do it the most efficient for the CES system? Or are we saying we want to hire new outreach workers? And if that's the case, how are they any different than the housing navigators we've already hired? Which is it?
Well, I don't think it's an either or. The intent of this is that we would actually start with a model of 2 teams. Right now, every agency has their own outreach workers. And for example, let's take the tents. With the tents, with the contract, there's going to be 5 outreach workers working for them. Primarily, their outreach is toward putting people in the tents. I mean, that's what happens. The outreach workers that work for your organization are working for your organization, whereas a better outreach model, at least we think, the ones that we have worked with and that we've been counseled about, in fact, every one of the HUD TA providers that's come in, and even when the USICH was here, all of their communication was that San Diego needs to do more and better outreach. And so we're not trying to compete at all. What we're trying to do is to model a system that would mirror the best practices possible. And so we are happy to share any training that comes in. So we do have some HUD TA providers that are willing to come in and help train the outreach workers in the community. At that time, we will invite all outreach workers in the system to participate if they wish to. But basically, the main difference is that this is moving from a provider-centric outreach program to an individual-centric program. In other words, one of the things that I saw when I first came here is that there was a lot of talk that people have vouchers and then we can't find them once we have a housing opportunity for them. I mean, I heard that anecdotally, I understand that, anecdotally, but I heard it from so many people, I didn't understand it. Because if you've given them a voucher, you really need to know right where they are. They're moved right in. And so this would be designed to keep track of individuals. And the team, 2 teams of 2 people each, may be able to cover part of the city. I mean, we would start here within San Diego City and work in that there. And I see a frown, and so I'll respond. What you're thinking is that we may overlap.
That's not what I'm thinking. Not at all.
Okay, well, we'll get there.
Because my point is, we did this by changing our outreach to housing navigators. Our housing navigators or outreach people are interacting with other agencies. We have placed, the Salvation Army has placed people with Alpha, and Alpha has, it is happening. The problem was the providers were not using the CES system properly. We've done a ton of training, and I do believe it's getting better. I like the idea of having a standard, and this is the way we're moving forward, but I wonder if it would be more advantageous if we subcontracted, like if PATH and all the different agencies said, we will do housing navigation or outreach your way for these dollars, rather than the agency hiring people. You're making it possible for the service providers to hire, but we're gonna play by your rules. It's your sandbox, so we're gonna do it your way. And that way you get, I think, more buy-in from the CEOs of those agencies because they're doing the work. rather than the governing body of the HUD dollars. That's my 2 cents.
Mr. Chair, just if I may, just to add on something to Major Carr's point, I think there's a second part to it, and that there is a component of that I've seen, a bifurcation, a disconnection of a lot of well-intentioned outreach. So a meeting of the minds of the outreach, I think, is an appropriate role for the task force to play. I know that's different than what they propose here, but I think that there is a need for that. There is also a greater need for more outreach, so I commend the effort. But there's one catch. I just want the clarification, really. It's that we always go with the first word of our title, regional task force. So I'm fine starting in the city of San Diego, but I need to understand that we are looking at capacity across the entire San Diego region. That's really important in terms of outreach. There's need up in north and east and south as much as there is in the city. And I know this is what we abide by, but I need that clarification that we're starting here as a pilot, but we're looking to expand county-wide. Would that be a fair?
Absolutely. We fully recognize the importance of our name as being regional. And in my report to you today, I think I hope that will become very clear. This is only intended to be a model of best practices and would just be a beginning, if it works.
What you're asking was a pilot program.
Yes. Well, no. What I'm asking for is authorization that we can engage in this type of, in an operational activity. I mean, I don't know that we're restricted, but I wanted to bring it to the board, and obviously I'm glad I did.
Well, you already have housing navigation employees, right? So they are doing direct service. I guess where I'm confused is how is it any different? How is these outreach any different than housing navigation? That's where I'm a bit confused.
I'm not convinced that right now housing navigation is working.
Okay.
Thank you.
And basically what we are doing is that we're looking at not changing, but adding to the model so that we can make sure that it's working.
Okay.
So that we can, part of the problem right now is that we have people with vouchers that are not being housed. We blithely say there aren't units, and yet on Craigslist there are units. And also, I know that the Housing Commission comes to our meetings saying there's X number of units, and by the time we get the information, there's X minus almost 100% of X units. And what we need to do is to have a system, is to look at our system and make it more real time in how we do it. I have often told the story that in a prior location, we reached out to an individual 768 times before the person was housed. I have not heard here of anyone of any similar range that the outreach was there. And so when we say person-centric, what we're saying is that we're with that person just on a regular basis. We know him. Actually, as we've thought of this, Mr. Chair, we think that had we been doing this type of outreach, that we might have been able to pick up the Hep A outbreak much earlier among the homeless population. We wouldn't have had the numbers, but we would be in their face and we would see that they were sick, and we would be able to at least move them into a medical situation or some other situation, whereas now what we're doing is we're really moving them into a specific physical location, service providers. Chairman?
Are you anticipating that you would do this for some period of time and go back and share the experiences with us?
we will be reporting to you on a regular basis. After today, you may wish that that weren't the case, but since I've been asked, I'm going to take the opportunity.
It seems to me the question isn't so much about the model, although it looks like it's a different model. The question really is, should the model be implemented by the Regional Task Force on the Homeless, or should the model be implemented by the provider community? That's actually, I think, what you're asking for, right? Because
Well, that's the implication. I mean, that's the bottom line implication. It's very hard for me to come to you or to any of the service providers and say, hey, we think we've got a better model than you. And all of a sudden, now you've got two organizations going at one another, and that's not helpful. It's not helpful for us, and we don't really want to do that. All we're suggesting is that we run another model separately, and we will compare the results. And we will do metrics on this so that we can know what works and what doesn't work. We're more than happy to, this is not intended to be a mission creep at all. It's an attempt to build in and bring forward best practices.
So have you considered piloting a similar project, partnering with an agency who has staff doing housing navigation or outreach, and see if you can actually lift the performance of a particular team and then take that to other agencies, as opposed to creating a different structure?
We could do that. We could do that. But the first problem is we don't have any money to offer you. The second is that we've been working with the mayor's office and the service providers that are therein and the funders of the tents. And what happened is we looked at it, and as we were dealing with the idea that the opportunity came to us to possibly negotiate some additional financial opportunities. So as a result of that, rather than trying to get into your business, because we're not looking to do that, I don't think I'd even begin to come here and ask for that. What we're saying is, let's run parallel projects on a model basis.
But they're not parallel if we don't have the same measuring metrics, if we don't have the same resources in the right word, but I want to make sure we're not counting two different kinds of.
Let me help, because I think I'm sensing your unease here. Let me just call your attention to the recommendation, because I think we're going much further. What I see, if this, depending on what comes out of this could affect the way everybody does business. Not by transfer, but just in the basic best practices that it can incorporate. The recommendation is to approve the proposal for the Regional Task Force to contract with the San Diego Housing Commission to hire 4 outreach employees to provide a model for client-centric system outreach. I don't think we should all feel so threatened by that.
There's no intent to threaten
No, but
anyone's
I sense that's what
operation.
I'm feeling.
I don't think it's a threat. I think it's, again, we have to decide if there are a lot of significant regional issues where our region needs to be more strategic and we need to coordinate. And as soon as we get this task force into on-the-ground tasks, it's going to take away from the bigger picture issues that need to have more resources, more coordination, more strategy. And I just worry that if we start taking the energy of Gordon and his staff, or future staff, and doing direct services, we know how difficult direct services are and how demanding it is, that I don't think it's a positive thing. Now, if you take this grant and say, we as a regional task force will create a model using other agencies as the implementers, and we'll practice it even now, because if we want to expand it to the whole region, you're going to have to subcontract anyway. unless you're like Los Angeles County, where their continuum has 40 outreach workers, and they're very ineffective, because all they do is run around the 88 cities and respond. We have to be really careful of what we're going to do here, because our resources are limited.
Trust me, John, there's some of us that have worked very hard with those limited resources, okay? That's why you had these emergency items. I think what we're trying to establish is there something that could be of value to all of us that could come out of this?
No, I think Joel said it very well. There's no threat, at least for me, and I'm not hearing threats from other providers, but actually.
No, I'm sensing a nervousness about this.
Yes, absolutely a nervousness. And I think that nervousness is from a sense of experience doing the work and questioning if this is the right way to go about it. I will, as a board member, certainly approve allocating resources and getting more outreach workers out there in our community. However, I want to understand what housing resource we're not effectively connecting people to now that these outreach workers will. Gordon, you mentioned vouchers. Are we talking about vouchers that are going unclaimed, or are we talking about filling shelters? And secondarily, to Joel's point, this group needs to be designing and coordinating and creating a regional response to homelessness. And so I would support this as long as it does not take away from, to Joel's point, Gordon, your energy and your staff's energy implementing a community plan to end homelessness. And if that can be, if either of you can speak to how this supports that, it would help me feel more comfortable that we're moving in the right direction.
To be honest with you, I'm not necessarily looking to get into an operational capacity. But having said that, this is in my mind, a significant hole in the fabric of the region. We do not have the resources to implement this program region-wide yet. What we want to do, all we're asking for is the possibility of testing it out. And because the original offer or the original negotiation, there is no offer on the table yet. I've been reminded this by my compatriot sitting next to me that he became very nervous when this showed up on the agenda. So I've been very careful with my words if we would have to find the money someplace to do it. I'm not necessarily looking for this, but what has happened because of the tents and because each of the tent providers has 5 outreach positions. And those outreach positions essentially will be used to fill the tents. I mean, that's what the money is, that's what it's going to be dealt with. And to me, we have an opportunity here because the money has already been committed, that we think that we can actually show some other best practices. That is all that it is. It is nothing more, nothing less. The attempt, we are not trying to take over anybody's business at all. We don't have that ability. We do have the capacity to bring in significant outside training, which, by the way, the HUD TA providers, it's the HUD leaders, it's the head of the interagency, White House Interagency Council on Homelessness, that have all remarked, everyone to a person, the need for greater outreach. So right now, outside sources are indicating we need more help here in San Diego. So accept that for what it is. We're just offering to do a pilot project, a model, to see what we can do using their strategies. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to chime in some of my observations, and I think I will be abstaining from this just because it is going to be involving the Housing Commission, of which I oversee as a member of the Housing Authority. But for those that haven't had a chance to peek, I would draw everyone's attention to page 24 of your board packet, because I think hopefully that would clarify some of the important outcomes that we would be getting through this action. Yes, it's in a pilot form, bringing on additional 2 teams of 2 individuals. I think that any value added on the ground for doing outreach is certainly important, but the more important function for the Regional Task Force on Homeless that I think is in conjunction with an extension of some of the outcomes from our org code assessments is making sure that street outreach models are done correctly. And it's through, I think, this experience that we're actually going to be doing on the ground, the practical experience, using real people to make real connections out there, not only achieving hopefully some good work and steering them in the direction of housing navigators, but more importantly, reporting back here, what are the models for outreach that we want to be able to move forward as a community. That's, I think, the biggest value that I'm looking forward to getting back for purposes of this body. So there certainly are 5 bullets there that I think highlight what those valued outcomes would be, and I think that they're certainly a good, worthy use of this board's funds.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'm here. Just to that point and by way of clarification. Okay.
Over here first. Yeah.
Oh, me? Okay, great. Sorry, I thought somebody else was first. Thanks so much, Chris, for saying that, because I've got the org code report and I'm kind of paging through it, and I think the piece that maybe would connect the dots is the systems piece, so that if that could be something to consider in the outreach work, is connecting the dots back to some of the high-level organizational priorities for the task force and for the region, because there's been so much strategic planning that's happened recently. So I think there's a lot of dots that could be connected, and using the on-the-ground experience of the outreach workers to then identify some of the systems issues, both for the technical component that the task force oversees through CES and HMIS, but also some of the system shifts that we need to look at. Like there's some recommendations around the veterans, more integration, the data around veterans that's in the org code report. As well as some of the tools that people can actually use and how to streamline. So I think if that's part of the pilot or part of the initiative, I think that makes a lot of sense, because you're linking that strategic work with what's happening on the ground.
Thank you. Sorry I jumped in. Just by way of clarification, since I'm one of the providers who will be operating one of the tents, the outreach workers of Father Joe's Villages, and I think this is the case, and Andre is here for VDSD and then an Alpha Project, we will be referring people not only to our own tents, but to the others as well. I mean, for instance, as I mentioned before, our tent will be focused on families. So if VDSD's outreach workers or Alpha's outreach workers come across families, they will be referring them to us. Similarly, if we come across single men, since we're not going to be focused on single men at our tent, we'll refer them on, if they're veterans, to the VDSD tent or to the Alpha tent. And so I just wanted to say that for the record, but also I'd be interested in, Gordon mentioned best practices as far as outreach workers are concerned, and I think we're all open, I know I'm open to knowing about best practices so we can most effectively use our outreach workers.
Sue first.
I would just like to make a few comments related to the data, because I live in it all the time. When Gordon talks about best practices, I would hope that you all understand that the shift that he's trying is not about placing people. It's about a project-centric outreach work versus a client-centric outreach working, right? So project-centric, the person comes to you with your project, you deal with them as much as you can, you refer him on to somebody else, but if he disappears, you have lost him, right? A client-centric, you never lose him, and that's the new best practice. And our biggest problem in San Diego is the availability of housing, affordable housing. That's our biggest giant problem. And so in other cities that don't have that problem, a project can identify a person and move him to an affordable house relatively quickly. We cannot do that. We have long periods of months sometimes before an affordable house comes available. And then you can't find him. He has left San Diego downtown, he's now in Vista, he's over in La Mesa, he's here or there, and there isn't anybody particularly responsible for knowing where he is until he shows up at another facility. And then we go, oh, there he is. But the unit has already been given out because he couldn't be found. That's our problem here. And so I think what Gordon is suggesting is that we pilot this, we take a look. If you have a client-centric system, then maybe many projects can get together and hire navigators that are client-centric. But it needs to be tested in our community to see if it can get that length of time shortened.
Thank you. Okay. We're going to try to wrap this up here.
Now that the deacon has spoken, I guess I can go ahead and speak as one of the providers operating one of the shelters. And Gordon, I certainly support your proposal. I think it's something that could benefit the community as a whole. But I will pose the question, is it something that can be done instead of RTFH hiring staff? Is it something that can be done through the existing shelter providers operating the shelters with the 5 outreach individuals that we've been funded to have at those facilities? Maybe we can use 1 or 2 of them to support the objective that you propose versus RTFH hiring additional outreach workers.
When we began looking at this, that was actually what we were thinking of doing. Because of the contract negotiations with the city have been perhaps a little challenging. We didn't want to mess up what was already on the table. In fact, that was exactly what the original thought was, is that, well, give us 1 each, and then we'll find an additional source, because they would be working very hard to do exactly, you know, the type of work that you're doing, but in a different fashion. So that it's a model, just as Sue said. So we're open to that. Like I say, it's we're not necessarily looking to hire people. We think that, you know, once the push on the tents or the pressure reduces, that the need for those 5 individuals may release. And by that time, if we've started, we may be able to, you know, just start bringing them under that. So those are all variables that we've thought about, but we just tried to look at it from a simple approach.
How about an agency that's not running a tent?
We will, as we establish best practices, we will access national trainers, and we will also be training local individuals to train others. Certainly what we would do, as in almost all things that we will try and do with the RTFH, is that we will try and pilot some best practices and then show you just a little bit different way that we could do it. What?
So you're basically saying no?
No, I thought I was saying yes, but I guess I need to be more direct.
No, I'm saying, how about rather, you're saying teach the best practices once you've already done them. And my suggestion was not using the tent providers to be those pilot people, but one of the other agencies in the room that.
All right, I'm hearing an offer right now. Andre is good for 1. I don't know if Deacon's good for 1.
He's good for 1.
All right, and we don't have the other, but if you're good for 1, then I've got 4. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Basically, that's exactly what it would be. If you had 1 and you wanted to come and let us help teach.
I think many agencies would be happy to have their staff go get training and do it the right way. We did that with 25 cities. We also
Okay, we got.
Yeah.
Just
Just one clarifying question, because I understand we need to move past this. I support it, but and it's a great point that outreach is often project-oriented. This appears city-oriented.
Not at all.
So will these outreach workers be outreaching outside of the city and placing individuals? To Sue's point,
Right.
you find Jim in downtown San Diego, he moves to Escondido. Will these outreach workers be working with Jim in Escondido? Or no, because they're funded by the Housing Commission?
Do you want me to respond?
Go ahead. I want to get this wrapped up.
That is a detail that we can work out.
It's an important detail because it's the crux of the argument in support of it.
Well, quite frankly, originally our funding was totally city-centric. And as we pilot it, it would be, the first ones would be in the city. That doesn't mean that we're not interested.
So
Greg, if you want to have us include two of yours so that there is a team,
I don't.
we will come to Escondido.
That's not what I'm coming from. I'm coming from a point of, if this is focused on clients, which we need to be, then it needs to be focused on clients throughout the area we are responsible for as the Regional Task Force on the Homeless, which is not the city of San Diego.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think the help on this, because I don't want to get lost in this, the importance we're moving.
We're very lost in this.
Well, I think it started, Gordon said something very important. We're moving from no disrespect, and I think everyone would here agree, from a provider-centered to a person-centered approach.
Yes.
And so we have to be true to fidelity to that of person-centered. So that is right to the heart of what we're doing with Live Well San Diego and everything we do in the agency. So I'm very committed to looking at how we could, Gordon, you want to hear this one, adding more resources beyond the San Diego Housing Commission, that it's a regional effort, so long as it meets those principles of person-centered, which you stated with, which I appreciate. And I get back to, we do need to have a meeting of the minds, and I think this is perfect for the task force, which you started also about. How do we really look at what is most efficacious, but it's looking at regional, so to Greg's point, that we don't have any mishandoffs. And so the commitment from the Health and Human Service Agency will be to look at what are the resources we could try to find to augment to the Housing Commission to help on this outreach augmentation, because it is critically important.
So we have our fourth. Thank you.
Okay. I don't know if we need to vote on this, but maybe what we need to bring back the details at a subsequent meeting as to how this will proceed, and see if all these commitments have held up and that we have launched what we're trying to do. There's a criticism of our region that we're not doing what we need to be doing. Okay? So let's not overlook that. We're going to try to change the way we're doing it to be able to do a better job. That doesn't mean you won't be doing it. It means that we want to get a better result because we're being shown by others with a lot of experience who have looked at us and said, here, we can make some improvements here. So let's not be okay, we're gonna be part of this. Okay, and we're gonna move on. We've got an awful lot to go through here. Let's move to the we are trailing item number 60, Legal Aid Society and Whole Person Wellness. And Greg will give us that report at the next meeting. And I owe somebody an apology. I'm drowning in paper up here. Daniel, where are you?
Yeah, I understand. Next time it's tabled.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I missed you on the public comment.
That's okay.
Since we ended up not taking any
Yeah, if
action.
you table, I'll do it next time.
When that comes back,
Thank you.
for any information or anything else, you're going to be our first speaker.
Okay.
You have a rain check.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I know, Walter, did you have an announcement?
I did. Actually, I wanted a couple of things, and I'm hoping that in a future meeting I'll have a little bit more time to talk about the youth piece and what's happening here in the community around addressing youth homelessness. And I wanted to first acknowledge Councilmember Ward and Supervisor Roberts, because I don't know how many of you know that this month, November, is National Runaway and Homeless Youth Month. You know that? Well, good. You should. And so we did have a walk and a rally on November 8th. Both the councilman and supervisor were represented to give proclamations on behalf of that. We also had Senator Tony Atkins' office there, as well as Assembly Member Todd Gloria as well. The reason I think that's really important, we need to keep this at the forefront, is that youth homelessness often is neglected. We really haven't spent hardly any time having that conversation. In fact, in the 60-page report, and Gordon, this is before your time, Focus Strategies admitted that they did not actually look at the youth piece when they developed this report. They didn't interview any of their youth providers, they didn't talk to youth. So the youth piece is, although much of this is relevant, it was not considered in developing the report. So I'm hoping that we continue to make youth a priority. Out of the 9,000 individuals that were counted as homeless individuals last year, 1,150 were youth. So it's not a small number in the population. In the future, I'm hoping to do a presentation on a grant we just submitted to the state for $2.5 million over 3 years, about $800,000 a year, to help move forward the youth system and develop. And we partnered with several nonprofits, including my partner here at Homestar, the Regional Task Force of the Homeless, and the Housing Commission. We actually put some dollars into the grant for Regional Task Force of the Homeless, so I'm helping you with your fundraising goals. And then also, hopefully, in one of the next meetings, be able to talk about the Voice of Youth Count, which was a national initiative. San Diego is one of 22 communities selected for that initiative. We were only one of 5 communities selected for an in-depth analysis and interviews, and those results were just released this month nationally, so we'll be able to release that. So I'm hoping we can do that and when I have more time in a future meeting. Thank you.
Nick, you had some quick update on FA?
Yes. Start with end in mind first. In the last 12 weeks, we have seen a decline in hepatitis A cases, the outbreak. And I will say that when I first presented it to this board about 6 months ago in May, we were already feverishly a few months into our vaccination efforts. Contrary to what maybe you have read or heard, our public health department, upon detecting hepatitis in the community, immediately began with its vaccination efforts. And we're beginning now to see, I'll show you in a moment, the results of that. But that did not come along with the heroic efforts of vaccinations of hundreds of nurses and outreach workers out in the streets, but it's been the remarkable collaboration with you all here, many of the providers, our community, with lived experience, who were there to help and accept the vaccination and let their colleagues know to take the vaccination, and then clearly with the partnership with the cities. And in fact, we have colleagues from the city of Encinitas here. They're going to be sharing momentarily about their great work. And as you know, at our last meeting, we had El Cajon, the cities of El Cajon and Chula Vista, sharing their great work, and we've heard from Councilman Ward already the continued great work of the city of San Diego. I'm not going to, we're tight on time, but I will like to go, if I may, fast forward to, keep going, right there, back one, right there. So this is what it's looking like in terms of the cases, and of course, what you're seeing in the tail end of this in the last now 12 weeks of data is that it's going down. That doesn't mean our efforts are going down. In fact, it's the opposite. We're even amping up more efforts because we have vaccinated over now 105,000 San Diegans, of which 85% or more are the folks that we're trying to reach, our at-risk population. And that's been a heroic feat, probably the best in the nation, and that's because of the help of everyone's effort here. We are not going to stop our efforts and our outreach and the vaccinations until we get back to a defined, no longer outbreak of cases and the type of cases. We're experiencing now about 1 or 2 cases versus 10 to 20 cases months ago. It is the sign of saturation. It's something called public health herd immunity, where you're vaccinating enough of the population that our people are no longer being able to spread it, coupled with the sanitation efforts that the cities and the county and the unincorporated area are doing, and just a really good education outreach efforts. So the results is, this is what happens when San Diego as a community comes together. We are able to deal with an unprecedented outbreak, and I'm reminded that this is an outbreak post-vaccine, the first of its kind. So it's not something that anyone in the nation has really experienced. We're experiencing here in Detroit and now in some other places, but all the best practices so far are even informing places like Detroit that have been at it for longer than we have. And I think it just speaks to the ingenuity and the partnership and the collaboration of San Diego. The last slide I'll say before I turn over to our colleagues in Encinitas, if I may. Next slide. So the concern we have is that the outbreak can jump, it can shift. And primarily now, the majority of the cases have been for folks that are homeless or substance using or a combination of the two, is the majority of the cases. In Detroit, they have found now that it has jumped with what's called the men who have sex with men population. And that is a concern. So we have stepped up our efforts of outreach and vaccination clinics with the men who have sex with men population, and also working closely with the faith-based community in addition to the MSM, just because of the food handling. And it was mentioned about faith community. We very support the faith community. We did a frequently asked questions to support all our faith organizations to get involved, not to fear getting involved. And obviously the last one that's been talked about, and this was really led through our chairman of our board here, but Supervisor Ron Roberts, and that is ensuring that we provide all the supports that we, Health and Human Service, do in terms of eligibility, linking people to public benefits, the public health nursing and the vaccinations, and also all the mental health services for the city's camp and tent areas. And we're prepared to do that for any other cities throughout the region that set up any of these type of tents. Right now, it's just the city of San Diego moving in that direction. So we are and have been providing at the campground, as we will, and working with all the providers that are running the tents. So that these are the efforts now that we're focusing on, and we talked about outreach and why it's so important. You can see we're investing heavily in outreach, and so having a coordinated effort matters immensely. I'd like to make, Mr. Chairman, now introduce, for a quick update, Mark Devlin, who's Assistant City Manager for the City of Encinitas, and he's joined by Nicole Piano-Jones, who's an analyst also with the city, and they've been doing some really great work in the City of Encinitas, and we're appreciative that they're here. They've also been addressing homelessness and have been good partners in that effort too, so thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Nick. I think this microphone is too low for tall people. So maybe I'll try this. Hopefully I can read my PowerPoint from here. But I'm Mark Deline. I'm the Assistant City Manager for Encinitas, and then Nicole is our homeless programs administrator. So she's really the expert here. How I got involved by this wonderful workshop the county put on that was focused towards city management. And so then we all kind of got a wake-up call a little bit about the issue and what we should be doing about it. So if we can go to the next slide. So Encinitas, just like everyone else, has a homeless community. And kind of use the word community deliberately because it is a community of people. You know, that they are together and they interface with themselves and others. And there's a distinct community. We do not have any 24-hour, like hardscape bathrooms. We have tried that in the past, and it really hasn't worked. There's been vandalism incidences. Vandalism in a bathroom, in a quality bathroom facility, is very expensive to repair. There's only so much damage you can do to a porta potty. And some of the other issues is that in some cases homeless have gone in the bathrooms and they've barricaded the doors and they've prevented other people from coming in the evenings. And so it's been of kind of limited benefit. So we're seeing that the porta potties is a simply better situation. Our homeless are primarily along the coastal areas, downtown in the parks. We've been noticing even before the Hepatitis A epidemic came on that we were getting increasing reports that were signs of encampment and feces and toilet paper in the bushes, and unpleasant signs really for any community. We've only had one known Hepatitis A incident so far, to my knowledge, and there was Coaster Station, the MCTD. There was a transient that had Hep A, and he was kind of defecating, uncontrollably all around the bathroom, and they had to come in with a hazmat crew essentially and really clean that out. This transient was arrested in this case. We work with a nonprofit called the Community Resource Center that is administering vaccinations programs in conjunction with support from the county. And they had most recent clinic on October 20th. And then we do not have a mandatory vaccination program for city public safety staff, but if it's voluntary, if people feel that they need it, they can have it. And we do contract with the county sheriff for law enforcement, so that's an independent agency that we're not in charge of the vaccinations for. If we could continue. And so what motivated the porta potty program? Well, we have as I mentioned, the signs of improper bathroom use were appearing in the community. We wanted to get rid of that. We're a beach community. When it rains, where does that stuff all go? It goes into the ocean, into our beaches, and so we wanted to help do something about that. And something here, I put the desire to allow the homeless to live with more dignity. I was struck by the compassion that expressed by our mayor and city council that we actually wanted to do something, irrespective of hepatitis A. So people actually had a place to go to the bathroom. And then I'd like to thank the Health and Human Services Agency because it really was a really good program. Wow, we could get free hand washing stations and free signage, and not only did they convince us of the program, but it was really important support. We go to the next one. And so we have established, so far, we have 5 different locations where we've installed the porta potties. The county provided signage, both in English and Spanish, and then the county hand washing stations. We have Swami's Beach, Moonlight Beach, our Encinitas Community and Senior Center, and lower City Hall parking lots. Our City Hall is located downtown. Downtown is one of our significant homeless areas. And we were space challenged, and so we put something in our parking lot. I couldn't think of anything else. North part of Encinitas, in a section called Lucadia, we were struggling to find a place. So we ended up finding a place in Lucadia Roadside Park, which is quite small. And if we can just whip through the next couple of pictures. Here's a picture of Swami's Beach. There's Moonlight Beach. There's Encinitas Community and Senior Center. And then here's the city, Lower City Hall parking lot. It was temporarily a construction site, which is why you see the debris there. That's getting cleaned up. And this is the problem area here. It's not a good situation. The neighbors are complaining almost on a daily basis. Continue. So we haven't had any problems with the Swami's Community Center or City Hall locations. And then with the Lucadia Roadside Park, we've got no opportunity to screen this visually. And we've got reports of smoking, drinking, litter, and some indecency. Your hand washing stations are being used for bathing, apparently, because there's no other water source in that area. So we've had to request additional controls with the sheriff. Some residents are complaining about the safety for the children, and it's also this location tends to flood in the winter. So we are looking for an alternative location for this unit. That's what's kind of interesting. I've had to talk to quite a few people about this, and kind of the good thing is when I explain what happens if we don't intercept the generation of feces and put it in a safe area. You have explained how it goes into the storm drain onto the beach, and then I've gotten a little bit less pushback from residents having to kind of look at this near their front door. We could move on. Then in Moonlight Beach, oddly enough, despite having the porta potty there, it seems that the use of the bushes and everything has increased according to some lifeguards. So that's required some additional disinfection. They spray with bleach in the area, and there's been some concern about this. One thing I just might mention about the beach locations is that I did participate in the point-in-time count last year, so we do have counts of the beaches. And I'd be curious to see if now that we have 24-hour bathrooms, if those counts have increased. So I suspect they might. This is an alternative Lucadia location. This is part of our roadside, right by 7-Eleven that we're looking at. And we can go on. Here's some of the options we're looking at, probably not too much interesting. Everybody's seen them. And in terms of the program cost, it's actually only costing us right now about $12,600 on an annual basis for the porta potties, which is pretty reasonable. And we can go on. And the future of the program, the council at this last the council meeting prior to last night, the council did approve continuing the program through the end of the fiscal year, and they've actually added a location. So we're going to go up to 6 locations and add one at Beacons Beach. This picture here is of where Beacons unit where it used to be at Beacons. And so we're going to present the program again, and we may continue it indefinitely. I think there's some support for that, or look for some other more attractive solutions. So at this point, possibly we can move on to Nicole's point, and then we can jointly handle questions, since she's the intelligent one on this subject, and she could probably, in case I got questions that I can't answer.
Yeah, and I apologize, we're going to be as quick as we can on the program, so thank you.
Yes, I'll go through it very quickly. Hi, good evening, everyone. Nicole Piano-Jones, City of Encinitas. We can move through this. We've had unanimous support from our city council to fund from general fund to the Community Resource Center, which is our social service agency, to implement Opening Doors, which is a housing first model. We piloted that in 2016, last year, and the priority was with veterans, and if you can go forward. Fortunately, the first year of the program was very successful. We exceeded all the goals that we had set forth in terms of assessments, matching them with housing navigators and placing households into permanent housing. So the council unanimously again supported the program in 2017. We have some goals set forward that we are hoping to exceed again. This time we're prioritizing all homeless and Encinitas, not just veterans. Again, same with the Housing First model. And other initiatives, we just needed one Section 8 voucher. We only have like 105 vouchers, so we have a very small program. We do use some of our CDBG programs for homeless prevention, and we just recently formed an outreach team with the San Diego County Sheriff's Department and the Health and Human Services Department going out. We also have an advisory committee in the city, which has been extremely helpful. It meets quarterly, where we kind of get into all of the issues and resources and how we can best serve each other. So Mark and I are available if anybody has questions. We also can send out the PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you. I would say kudos to Ed Stevens. I want to thank everybody for sticking with us for the entire meeting, and because of that, we will not have a meeting in December. That's your early holiday present. Our next meeting is scheduled for January 18th, same place, same time. What do you have, Greg? You can't conceivably have any.
I wouldn't do it if it wasn't very important. At the last meeting, our CEO asked me to serve as a liaison to the different ballot measure conversations that are happening. And I want to report to everyone that the San Diego Housing Federation and the collaboration they are leading will be bringing forward a ballot measure within the city of San Diego. And we'll be presenting that to the San Diego City Council Rules Commission on January 10th. They've done initial polling. It is very favorable and indicates significant support for funding to build housing to help individuals experiencing homelessness, and it's important to share that with the group and invite people who are interested to show up, suit up, and support it on January 10th.
It is January 26th.
Point in time.
January 26th, 4 a.m.
Okay, I want to get that on up there. We're enlisting a lot of help. Bill Gepler, he was here earlier. He's still here. I know Bill's very involved in the community and driving this home and getting this up a broader range. But thank you for that, Bill.
Yeah, January 26th, love to have as many people as possible to come out and help.
Anything you can do in 3 seconds or less.
Tax reform, the vote at the Senate is looking like it's going to happen tomorrow at 11. So if you can call your senator, call your representative. We're at very high risk of losing our 4% tax credit program, which has produced 10,000 units in the San Diego area, and we'll be in major trouble if we lose it.
Okay. With that, we are adjourned. Have a nice holiday season.